You're standing in the hippodrome. The seats are packed, 50,000 bodies pressed together under Egyptian sun, and the air tastes like sweat and incense and something else you can't name. The man in the imperial box is young, maybe 26, wearing purple, and he's smiling. The crowd is chanting his name. Caracalla, Caracalla, Caracalla. You're chanting too, because everyone is chanting. And the soldiers lining the exits haven't moved, which means everything is fine. The emperor raises his hand. The crowd roars louder. And then, somewhere behind you, a gate slams shut. A flash of faces in the stands. A child on someone's shoulders. The glint of a gladius being drawn. Alexandria, the year 215 of the Common Era. This is the city that invented the library. The city where Euclid worked out geometry and Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the earth. The second largest city in the Roman Empire. 250,000 people, maybe more. Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, Romans, traders from India and sub-Saharan Africa. A place that considered itself the intellectual capital of the world. In a few hours, the streets will be slick with blood. Hey, welcome. If the title brought you here, you're probably wondering how a joke, an actual joke, could possibly result in a massacre. And look, I get it. It sounds like clickbait. Except it's not. This actually happened. The sources agree on the broad strokes, even the ones who hated each other. And the reason you've never heard about it is the same reason most ancient atrocities vanish. The people who committed them controlled the narrative for centuries afterward. If this kind of deep dive into imperial madness is your thing, subscribing takes 1 second, and it genuinely helps the channel survive the algorithm. Here's what we know for certain. The Emperor Caracalla arrived in Alexandria in the winter of 215. He came with a large military escort, legions, praetorians, German bodyguards. Officially, he was there to visit the tomb of Alexander the Great, whom he idolized. Unofficially, he was furious. The Alexandrians had been making fun of him. Now you might think, so what? Emperors got mocked all the time. Graffiti in Pompeii insults Nero. Satirists in Rome wrote pamphlets about Domitian's baldness. The Roman world had a robust tradition of political humor, and usually the powerful just ignored it. Caracalla did not ignore it. The jokes weren't subtle. They mocked him for killing his brother, Geta, which he had done the previous year, stabbed him to death in their mother's arms, according to some sources. They mocked his short stature. They mocked his obsession with Alexander the Great, calling him a wannabe, a pale imitation. One persistent rumor, and this one clearly got under his skin, suggested that he hadn't just murdered Geta. The Alexandrians whispered that he'd also slept with his own mother, Julia Domna. Whether that last claim was true is almost beside the point. What mattered was that the Alexandrians were saying it out loud. They were laughing. They put it in songs. They painted it on walls. And Caracalla heard about every single word. The strange part is he didn't attack immediately. He entered the city peacefully. He made sacrifices at the temples. He visited Alexander's tomb and reportedly left offerings. His own purple cloak, rings, jewels. He announced a public festival. He invited the young men of Alexandria to gather in a great assembly, supposedly to honor them, possibly to recruit them into a new military unit named after Alexander. Thousands showed up. Maybe tens of thousands. They gathered in an open area. Some sources say the hippodrome. Others say a broad public square near the gymnasium. They came unarmed. They came dressed for a celebration. The soldiers were already in position. To understand what happened next, you have to understand who Caracalla was before he became a mass murderer. His real name was Lucius Septimius Bassianus, but almost no one called him that. Caracalla was a nickname. It came from a type of Gallic hooded cloak he liked to wear. He was born in Lugdunum, modern Lyon, around 188 of the Common Era. His father was Septimius Severus, a North African general who seized the throne in a civil war. His mother was Julia Domna, a Syrian noblewoman from a family of powerful priests. From the very beginning, Caracalla was groomed for war. His father took him on campaign as a teenager. By the time he was 14, he'd watched men die in battle. By 18, he'd commanded troops. This wasn't unusual for imperial heirs. What was unusual was the intensity. Septimius Severus reportedly told his sons on his deathbed, "Be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, and scorn everyone else." Caracalla took the last part seriously, the middle part too. The problem was the first instruction, be harmonious. Caracalla had a brother, Gaeta, only 11 months younger, and they despised each other. Not normal sibling rivalry, genuine visceral hatred. Their father had tried to solve this by making them co-emperors, hoping shared power would force cooperation. It did not. For about a year after Severus died, Caracalla and Gaeta ruled together. They divided the palace. They refused to eat at the same table. Their mother, Julia Domna, reportedly had to physically stand between them at public events to prevent violence. There were rumors of assassination attempts, of poisoned wine, of bodyguards doubling as hit squads. Then, in December of 211, Caracalla made his move. He requested a private meeting with Gaeta, a reconciliation, he said, in their mother's chambers. Julia Domna was present. Gaeta arrived, and within minutes, centurions burst into the room and stabbed Gaeta to death. The ancient historian Cassius Dio, who was actually in Rome at the time, reports that Gaeta died in his mother's arms. She was wounded trying to protect him. Imagine that room, the smell of iron. Julia Domna on the floor, covered in her son's blood, and the surviving son standing over her. Caracalla didn't flee. He walked out and immediately went to the Praetorian camp to secure the loyalty of the guards with a massive cash payment. Within weeks, Caracalla launched what we would now call a purge. Anyone connected to Gaeta, friends, advisors, servants, even people who'd merely spoken well of him, was executed. The death toll in Rome alone may have reached 20,000. Gaeta's name was chiseled off inscriptions. His image was scratched from paintings. The Romans called this damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory. Gaeta was supposed to vanish from history. The Alexandrians had other ideas. They kept talking. They kept joking. They kept the memory of the fratricide alive in songs and graffiti and theater performances. And every merchant who traveled between Alexandria and Rome carried those jokes back to the imperial court, where Caracalla heard them and remembered and waited. 3 years. He waited 3 years. The visit to Alexandria wasn't spontaneous. Caracalla planned it months in advance. He sent letters ahead announcing his arrival. He arranged for supplies, for accommodations, for the legions to be fed and housed. This was a state visit, complete with all the logistics that implied: grain shipments, advanced security, diplomatic coordination with local officials. The Alexandrians prepared a welcome. They decorated the harbor. They organized processions. They minted coins celebrating the emperor's visit. Whatever mockery had circulated in private, the public face was enthusiastic. Alexandria depended on imperial favor. The city's grain supply, its tax status, its legal privileges, all of this flowed from Rome. When an emperor showed up in person, you rolled out every carpet you had. Caracalla arrived by ship, probably in late 214 or early 215. The dates are fuzzy, but the sequence is clear. He entered the city through the Canopic Gate. He toured the Serapeum, the great temple complex dedicated to the hybrid god Serapis. He visited the Mausion, the famous center of learning, and he went to the Soma, the tomb where Alexander the Great's body had been preserved in honey for over 500 years. Here's the catch. Caracalla's obsession with Alexander wasn't just admiration, it was identification. He dressed like Alexander. He claimed to have visions of Alexander. He reorganized military units to resemble Alexander's Macedonian phalanx. Some sources suggest he believed himself to be Alexander's reincarnation. The Alexandrians knew this, and they found it hilarious. Alexander had conquered the known world by the age of 30. Caracalla had murdered his brother and spent most of his reign fighting inconclusive border wars. The comparison was absurd, and Alexandrians, famous throughout the ancient world for their sharp wit and sharper tongues, made sure everyone knew it. One joke, recorded by the historian Herodian, claimed that Caracalla called himself Alexander and Antoninus, combining the name of the conqueror with that of the respected earlier emperor. The Alexandrians reportedly suggested a third name, Geta, the murdered brother. The implication was clear: you're not Alexander, you're just a fratricidal pretender. Another version of the mockery focused on Julia Domna. The rumors about Caracalla and his mother had circulated since Geta's death, and in Alexandria they took on a particular edge. Some Alexandrians allegedly compared Caracalla to Oedipus, the king who killed his father and married his mother. The insult was layered. It linked him to Geta's murder and suggested a relationship that, true or not, violated every taboo in Roman society. This section discusses historical allegations about private life in antiquity. No graphic detail. Focus on political implications and source bias. Ancient biographers writing decades later, often with political grudges, report these accusations. Modern scholars treat them as contested, more likely propaganda than fact. What matters historically is that the allegations circulated, that Caracalla knew about them, and that they shaped his response. He smiled through all of it. He accepted the honors. He praised the city. And then he announced the gathering. The order went out. All able-bodied young men should assemble in a designated area. The pretext varied depending on which source you trust. Cassius Dio says Caracalla claimed he wanted to form a new phalanx in honor of Alexander, an elite military unit composed of Alexandrian youth. Herodian suggests it was framed as a religious festival, a purification ceremony, something auspicious. Either way, the turnout was massive. Alexandrians were proud. They were proud of their Greek heritage, their intellectual reputation, their connection to Alexander's legacy. An emperor offering to honor that pride, to recruit their sons into a unit bearing Alexander's name? It was flattering. It was politically advantageous. It was, apparently, irresistible. They gathered by the thousands. Young men, primarily, but families too. Parents who came to watch, siblings who tagged along. The square filled. The atmosphere was festive. Musicians played. Food was distributed. This was supposed to be a celebration. The soldiers had already surrounded the area. Roman legions didn't just show up to events looking decorative. They moved in formation. They carried weapons. They took positions that controlled exits, sight lines, choke points. The Alexandrians, packed into the square, probably noticed the unusual number of troops. They may have attributed it to security concerns. After all, an emperor was present. They didn't realize they were being corralled. Caracalla gave a signal. The exact moment is lost to history. Maybe he raised his hand. Maybe a horn sounded. What happened next is consistent across sources. The soldiers turned on the crowd and began killing. The ancient accounts describe chaos. People trampling each other trying to escape, bodies falling in heaps, the screaming. The soldiers worked systematically, cutting down anyone in reach, pursuing those who ran, finishing the wounded. The killing went on for hours. Picture the geometry of slaughter. A confined space, limited exits, trained soldiers with swords. This wasn't battle. This was a meat processing operation designed by people who understood exactly how to maximize casualties in exactly this kind of terrain. How many died? The sources give numbers ranging from a few thousand to over 20,000. Cassius Dio, our most detailed source, puts the figure high enough that bodies blocked the streets and blood flowed into the harbor. Herodian describes the massacre in similarly apocalyptic terms. Later, Christian historians, writing with their own agendas, inflated the numbers further. The scholarly consensus lands somewhere around 20,000. Maybe more, maybe slightly fewer. Counting casualties from ancient massacres is notoriously imprecise. What we can say for certain is that the death toll was enormous, that it was deliberate, and that it was preceded by deliberate deception. Caracalla didn't attack an enemy army. He lured civilians into a trap using lies about honor and opportunity. Then he killed them for making jokes. The massacre didn't end in the square. Caracalla reportedly ordered the city sacked, soldiers going house to house, killing anyone they found. He banned public gatherings. He expelled foreigners. He divided Alexandria physically, ordering a wall built across part of the city to separate districts and prevent residents from assembling. The grain supply continued. That part mattered. Alexandria fed Rome. Roughly a third of the Roman grain supply came from Egypt, and Alexandria was the shipping hub through which it flowed. Caracalla needed that grain. His soldiers needed that grain. Whatever else happened, the economic infrastructure had to survive. So the killing was, in a sense, selective. Enough to terrorize, not enough to cripple. This is the logic that makes atrocities sustainable. Not uncontrolled rage, controlled rage. Violence calibrated to achieve a political objective while preserving what the perpetrator needs. The Alexandrians had humiliated him. The Alexandrians would pay. The grain ships would still sail. If you've made it this far into a video about ancient massacres, I'm genuinely curious. Does this change how you think about supposedly irrational violence? Drop a thought in the comments. Not about Caracalla specifically, but about whether we underestimate how calculated atrocity usually is. Caracalla left Alexandria within days. The historians don't record his mood, whether triumphant, satisfied, or simply done. He continued his journey east toward Parthia, where he was planning a major military campaign. The massacre was, for him, a completed errand. An item checked off a list. The aftermath in Alexandria is harder to trace. Roman provincial administration didn't produce the kind of records that let us track public mourning or community recovery. What we know is that Alexandria remained a major city. It continued to function. People rebuilt, as people always do after catastrophe. The memory, though, persisted. Decades later, when Caracalla was long dead, Alexandrian writers were still telling the story. The massacre became part of the city's identity, a wound that shaped how Alexandrians thought about imperial power, about vulnerability, about the cost of speaking freely. It also became a cautionary tale for future emperors. Alexandria remembers. Alexandria talks. And sometimes Alexandria pays. The question that hangs over all of this is simple. Why didn't anyone stop him? Caracalla was one man. He commanded armies, yes, but those armies were made up of individual soldiers who made individual choices. The officers who surrounded the square, the centurions who gave the order to advance, the legionaries who swung the swords, each of them decided to participate. Each of them could theoretically have refused, except they couldn't, not really. Roman military discipline was absolute. Refusing an order was punishable by death, and not just for the individual soldier. Entire units could be decimated, meaning 1 in 10 men killed as collective punishment. The incentives all pointed one direction: obey, follow orders, don't ask questions. Your life, your career, your family's security, all of it depended on compliance. Consider the centurion in that square. He has a wife in Pannonia, children he hasn't seen in 2 years, a pension waiting if he survives 25 years of service. The emperor gives an order. The centurion's options are obey and go home rich, or refuse and die in a ditch. The 20,000 Alexandrians are abstractions. His family is real. The broader Roman system didn't have mechanisms for checking imperial power in the moment. The Senate was far away, politically neutered, incapable of intervention. The Praetorian Guard existed to protect the emperor, not constrain him. Provincial governors owed their positions to imperial patronage. No one in the chain of command had both the authority and the incentive to say no. Institutions designed to serve power don't suddenly become instruments of accountability when power is abused. They continue serving. They continue functioning. They process atrocity with the same efficiency they process taxation. Later, of course, people talked. Cassius Dio wrote his damning account. Herodian recorded his version. Christian historians centuries later used Caracalla as an example of pagan tyranny. The historical judgment was unanimous. This was monstrous, inexcusable, a crime against humanity. Here's the problem. All of that condemnation came after Caracalla was safely dead. While he lived, he faced no consequences. He continued ruling. He continued commanding armies. He continued being obeyed. The massacre was neither the beginning nor the end of his reign. Just one event among many, processed by a system that had no category for unacceptable. Caracalla died 2 years later, in 217, during his Parthian campaign. The killer was a soldier named Martialis, who stabbed him while he was urinating on the side of a road. The assassination was arranged by the Praetorian prefect, Macrinus, who became emperor immediately afterward. The irony is palpable. Caracalla spent his reign paranoid about plots, executing anyone he suspected of disloyalty, and he was killed by the man responsible for his personal security. The system he'd trusted to protect him turned on him the moment his utility ended. Macrinus didn't last long either. A year and a few months. Then a military revolt put Julia Domna's relatives back on the throne. The Severan dynasty lurched onward for another 2 decades before collapsing entirely in the crisis of the 3rd century. Throughout all of this, Alexandria remained. The city that had been massacred continued to pay taxes, ship grain, produce scholars. Its wound was absorbed into the broader fabric of imperial administration. There was no trial, no reparations, no formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The empire moved on. This is what the aftermath of atrocity usually looks like. Not dramatic justice, not redemption arcs, not villains brought low by their crimes. Just continuation. The system that enabled the violence absorbs the violence and keeps functioning. People die, and the bureaucracy processes their deaths as paperwork. You're standing in Alexandria, 220 of the Common Era, 5 years after the massacre. The wall Caracalla ordered built is still there, cutting through neighborhoods that used to connect. The Serapeum still receives worshippers. The library, what remains of it, still holds scrolls. Children are growing up who don't remember the screaming, who know about the massacre only as something their parents sometimes mention in lowered voices. The harbor is busy, ships are loading grain. Life continues because life must continue. That's not resilience in any triumphant sense. It's just the mathematics of survival. People who die can't contribute to the future. People who live can. Alexandria chose to live. The empire chose to let it. The Roman historian Cassius Dio wrote about the massacre with undisguised horror. He called it barbaric, unprecedented, a stain on the empire. He recorded the rumors and the jokes and Caracalla's paranoid reaction. His account is our most detailed source, and it was written by someone who personally despised Caracalla and had reason to make him look as bad as possible. Does that mean we can't trust it? Not exactly. Dio's bias is visible, which actually makes him easier to read critically. When he reports that Caracalla killed 20,000 people, we can ask, is he inflating the number? When he describes Caracalla's rage, we can ask, is he psychologizing after the fact? The useful approach isn't believing everything or believing nothing. It's triangulating between sources, looking for convergence. Herodian confirms the broad strokes. Later sources confirm the broad strokes. The material evidence, inscriptions that stop being produced, archaeological gaps that suggest disruption, aligns with the narrative. The massacre happened. The scale was catastrophic. The premeditation was real. What remains contested is meaning. Was Caracalla clinically insane? Some modern scholars have tried to diagnose him posthumously. Paranoid personality disorder, psychopathy, the neurological effects of chronic illness. He was reportedly sickly throughout his reign, possibly suffering from what some historians think was a lingering infection. Maybe his brain was literally inflamed. The problem with this framing is that it treats atrocity as aberration, as disease, as something that happens when normal governance breaks down. Except Caracalla's governance didn't break down. It functioned. It continued functioning throughout the massacre and afterward. The soldiers obeyed. The taxes flowed. The system worked exactly as designed. Think about what that reveals. The machinery of empire included no fail-safe against a massacre ordered by the emperor. The institutions that looked so impressive from the outside, law, administration, military hierarchy, were all optimized for efficiency, not ethics. When the man at the top wanted blood, the system delivered blood. The joke that killed 20,000 people wasn't the cause. It was the pretext. The cause was a political system that concentrated absolute power in one person, surrounded that person with armed men incentivized to obey, and provided no mechanism for anyone else to intervene. Given those conditions, the only question was when something like this would happen, not whether. Alexandria made the jokes. Caracalla had the power. The system did the rest. There's a temptation with stories like this to treat them as warnings, to extract a lesson, a moral, something we can carry forward. The danger of unchecked power, the vulnerability of those who speak truth to it, the complicity of institutions in atrocity. These lessons are real. They're also incomplete. The harder truth is that Alexandria wasn't uniquely vulnerable. It was just unlucky. Cities throughout the Roman world mocked their emperors, told jokes, circulated rumors. Most of the time, nothing happened. The emperors ignored it or couldn't hear it or didn't care enough to respond. Alexandria became a massacre because Caracalla was Caracalla, a specific person with a specific psychology in a specific moment of rage and opportunity. History isn't a morality play where causes lead neatly to consequences. Sometimes terrible things happen because one person with power makes one terrible decision, and no one can stop them. That's not a lesson. It's just a fact about how power works. The Alexandrians who died in that square weren't killed because they made a mistake. They were killed because they lived in a system where their lives were less important than an emperor's ego, and on one particular day, that reality became lethal. The jokes they told were the same jokes everyone told. Their only error was proximity. You're standing at the harbor now, watching the grain ships load. The workers are Egyptian mostly, hauling sacks under the supervision of Greek overseers. The Roman bureaucrats are somewhere in the government district, processing documents. The legions are encamped outside the city, running drills. The system that enabled the massacre is still running, still processing, still functioning. It will continue functioning for another 250 years, give or take. The Western Empire will eventually fall. The eastern half will persist as Byzantium. Alexandria will survive both, will survive the Arab conquest, will survive the medieval period and the Ottoman Empire and the British Protectorate, and will still be there, a city of 5 million people in the 21st century of the Common Era. The massacre will become a footnote, a paragraph in specialized histories, a video on YouTube. The names of the dead are lost. This is almost always true of ancient massacres. The sources record the name of the killer, the name of the city, sometimes a rough casualty count. The victims are aggregated, anonymized, reduced to a number, 20,000. A statistic. Historians sometimes try to reconstruct who those people might have been. Young men, primarily, since the assembly was supposedly organized to recruit them. Many would have been Greek speakers, members of Alexandria's educated class, the people most likely to make sophisticated jokes about Alexander and Oedipus. Some would have been Egyptian, some Jewish, some from the mixed communities that made Alexandria cosmopolitan. Families, individuals, each with a name and a history and a future that ended in that square. We don't know any of them. This is what it means to be forgotten. Not just that the story fades, but that the people inside the story become abstractions, become numbers, become supporting evidence for a larger point about empires and power. The massacre of Alexandria is remembered. The massacred are not. Caracalla is remembered. His face survives on coins and statues. His edicts are studied in law schools. The Constitutio Antoniniana, which extended Roman citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire, was his policy, and it transformed legal history. His military campaigns are analyzed in military history courses. He exists as a person, a subject, an agent who did things. The 20,000 exist as objects, things that were done to. If you've stayed for this entire video, thank you, genuinely. This is the kind of history that doesn't get enough attention because it doesn't fit neatly into hero narratives or progress stories. Subscribing, sharing, leaving a comment. All of it helps more people encounter the past in its full, uncomfortable complexity. The last thing to say is this: Alexandria still stands. The city that was massacred for jokes has survived for 23 centuries, has outlasted every empire that tried to control it, and continues to house millions of people who live their lives in the ordinary ways people do. That's not redemption. The dead are still dead. The massacre still happened. What it is, maybe, is just duration. The city endures. The memory persists. Somewhere in Alexandria right now, someone is probably telling a joke. The year is 215 of the Common Era. You're standing in a square in Alexandria, and the gates have just slammed shut behind you. The sound echoes off the stone buildings, off the temple columns, off the faces of the people around you who are just starting to realize something is wrong. The emperor is watching from a raised platform. He's smiling. He's been smiling all day. The soldiers are drawing their swords. You can hear the metal, that distinctive scrape of blade against scabbard, multiplied across hundreds of men moving in unison. A man near you starts to run. He doesn't get far. This is the moment the jokes stop being funny. This is the moment 20,000 people begin to die because an emperor couldn't take an insult. This is the moment that will vanish from popular memory for centuries, will be mentioned only in academic texts and specialist histories, will wait nearly 2,000 years to become a video on a platform that wouldn't exist for millennia. The strange thing about history is that it doesn't know its history when it happens. The people in that square didn't know they'd become a cautionary tale about power and speech and the cost of defiance. They just knew they were trapped, and armed men were advancing, and they had made a terrible mistake by trusting an emperor who said he came in peace. The last thing some of them probably thought was, it was just a joke. It was just a joke. It was just a joke.